Welcome to Ask the Expert with noted radio host Steve Sleeper. Each week, Steve interviews entrepreneurs and professionals and shares their intriguing stories of success and service. Now, here's radio veteran Steve Sleeper.
And welcome to another Ask the Expert. Today our guest is Brian Douglas with Brian Douglas & Associates in Atlanta, an estate planning attorney. Brian, how are you today?
I'm great, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, Brian, tell me a little bit about yourself and your firm.
Well, as you said, we're located here in Atlanta, the great state of Georgia. We focus primarily on estate planning, asset protection, and helping families and individuals preserve their legacy, their wealth, avoid taxes, define the future for themselves, and then what they want to leave for their families.
And you touched a little bit on this, but what is estate planning? What does it include?
Estate planning, it can be a mysterious topic, and it's not really that mysterious but when you think about it, we say estate and people think about what's my estate, and they think it's all my stuff, right? Well, it is, and that's a very accurate description of estate planning, but I think you got to take it one step further, because estate planning not only encompasses your stuff, your money, your property, your real estate, whatever you want to, whatever your stuff is, but it also encompasses you as an individual. It deals with your personal well-being. What happens if I end up in the hospital and I can't take care of myself? I can't make medical decisions. If I'm in a coma, who can step into my place and advocate for my care? What happens if I get dementia and I can't, do banking transactions anymore, pay my bills? Who has access to those accounts? So, like I said, it can be a little misleading, the word estate planning, but it really encompasses you as a human being, your life, your property, your personal health while you're alive and well, in the event that you were to become incapacitated, and also after you're gone, and what you're going to leave for your family, your spouse, and for the generations to come.
Well, that brings me to, and I'm going to tip my hand on the next 4 or 5 questions, but trust, will, probate, and power of attorney. So let's tackle each one individually. What's a trust?
Okay, a trust is it's a legal fiction, and I know that is clear as mud, I'm sure, to the listeners. Yeah. But a trust is a document, and it's an entity, if you will. Not unlike, you can think of it like a corporation. Corporations under the law don't exist. They don't live. They don't breathe. They're not humans like you and I. They exist as a creature of the law and the legislature. A trust, it works exactly the same way. It's an entity that's designed by law that can hold your assets and has certain rules with it. The easiest way to think of a trust, now that I've confused everyone, is think back to when you were a kid and you had that little red wagon, right? Your radio flyer wagon or whatever it was, and you had your wagon. And what did you do? You got up on Saturday morning, you watched your cartoons, and then you grabbed your wagon and you threw your toy guns or your baseball or football, or you put all your stuff in there. And you're walking down the street and you had your wagon with all your stuff in it. The trust is the wagon. Right? That's what it is. The trust is the vehicle that holds whatever it is that you own. And you're the trustee, so you're in charge of the wagon. So you're the person pulling the handle and directing where that trust goes and what happens with the stuff. And then when someone walks up to you and wants to ask you a question or wants to say, hey, can I play with that baseball right there, as the trustee, the gatekeeper, you get to decide, does Brian get to play with Steve's baseball or not? Because you're the gatekeeper. So it's maybe oversimplification, but it's really not. That's exactly how it works, and that's what a trust is designed to do. It's really just a setup to hold your assets and to have the rules that govern who gets to have access to those things, when, for how long, and under what conditions they get to participate in whatever's inside that trust.
Yeah, and the wagon analogy makes it real easy to understand. Okay, now let's talk about a will. What is it, and then what happens if a person dies without a will?
Okay. Well, a will, I think generally speaking, people are very, comfortable with the definition of a will, or what a will is. It's your instructions for what happens to all of your stuff after you're dead and gone, when you pass away. So if you want to leave it to your spouse, if you want to leave your stuff to a charity, somebody gets the family heirloom, somebody gets this, somebody gets that. That's what a will does. A will is just your final say at what happens to your things once you pass away. The big difference between a will and a trust, there's a couple of them. But one of them is that a will only is effective in the event that you pass away. Meaning, if I have a will and I end up in a coma, my will doesn't have any powers over me because I'm still alive. It hasn't gone into effect yet. It hasn't been triggered. But a trust actually does deal with the fact that I might go into a coma. I might become incapacitated. So very, very huge distinction there. Just to step back and touch on trust for a second. To your second question, though, what happens when someone dies without a will? I'm going to clue you and your listeners into some maybe great advice, maybe scary advice, but that is your state, whatever state it is that you live in and reside in, has written a will for you, whether you know that or not. Most people don't know that, and it's not as formal will. It's not sitting in a drawer somewhere and it looks like the will that I would prepare for you. But essentially, the state legislatures in every state have codified what happens in the event that someone dies, a resident of your state, without a will in place. So now that you know you have a will, isn't it kind of troubling to think, what does it actually say? Where does it go? What do you they've taken the time to write something up for you and basically have laws in place for you, but most people don't know that, number one, so then they certainly don't know where it actually the property would go or how it would be divided.
So if I die without a will, do we go to probate, or tell me about probate?
Sure. So probate is a court. It's inside the judicial system, and probate is the process by which you administer the estate of someone once they're dead and gone. There's a judge involved. It is a court proceeding. It's not always adversarial as we think of normal court, like divorce court, where you have the plaintiff and the defense, and they're fighting over whatever. It can be adversarial. There's certainly no shortage of heirs that will fight over the way wills are read and interpreted and the way property is divided, but it doesn't have to be adversarial, and it isn't automatically adversarial, whereas most judicial proceedings are. But like I said, the probate process is the process by which we legally administer the estate of the decedent, and we follow the wishes of their will, whatever it is. The job of the probate court is to make sure the wishes are followed and that everything is above board, and so on and so forth. In the event that you don't have a will, you still do go to probate court and you file petitions and you do things what's called intestate, and dying intestate means you died without a will, and then you rely on the laws of the state that you live in or the jurisdiction where you resided when the person died, and things can get very complicated because things may end up going in directions that you never wanted nor intended them to go. But you're stuck with those because you didn't do anything to put the planning in place and actually, draw up your own desires through your own and wishes through your own will or your estate plan.
Okay, and I think this leads to my next question, and you've touched on it, but power of attorney. Talk about that.
Power of attorney. There's essentially two kinds of power of attorney that we talk about in the estate planning realm. One is a healthcare power of attorney, and one is a financial. You can do them both under the same umbrella, if you will, meaning you could have just one. I'm a fan of doing two separate ones, and the reason being is if I need a medical power of attorney for Steve because Steve, hit his head and thinks he's Abraham Lincoln, I don't necessarily need to go to his doctor and give him 20 pages of stuff about his financial accounts and that I can go to his bank and so on and so forth. It just kind of overly complicates things. So I like to separate the two kinds. One that deals with healthcare and those types of matters, the medical side of things, and the other one that deals with the financial side of things. But basically, a power of attorney is a document where you, when you're alive and well and competent, nominate someone or a number of people who are able to act in your behalf and transact business or make decisions or act on your behalf in the event that you're not there either physically or mentally able to do it yourself. And so it can be they're very important documents. We see it a lot of times, Steve, with the aging population that we have. I'll get a call from adult children, and they'll say, Brian, my mom's got Alzheimer's, and we're trying to put her in a nursing home, but they want to see our power of attorney because my mom can't sign the documents to admit herself because she's mentally incompetent. She doesn't know what's going on. And so I'll say, well, where is it? Let me look at it. Can you send it to me? They say, well, we don't have one. We're calling you because we need to hire you to create one for us. And that's when the problem arises, because if mom is not competent to sign legal documents, she's not competent to sign powers of attorney or anything. So now it's too late. We don't have that power of attorney in place. And when you need it, you can't go back and get it because, unfortunately, things like Alzheimer's and dementia, they're irreversible. So if someone's mentally insufficient or incompetent, they're not going to until they cure it, they're not going to come back from that. Generally, only gets worse.
So we're talking about things that are needed to be known before there is a crisis. But I noticed looking at your website, which, by the way, is Atlanta GA estateplanning.com. I got that right, didn't I?
You did.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
did.
Yeah.
Yep.
GA for Georgia, of course, the postal code for Georgia. But I divorce. I mean, here's something that is, a bit of a crisis thing, but you do touch on estate planning and divorce. Talk a little bit about that, Brian.
Yeah, estate planning and divorce is a very, very important topic. That, and not for lack of wanting, but generally divorce attorneys don't spend a lot of time on it, namely because they're not expert practitioners in estate planning, and their skill set lies in divorce. So they don't usually spend a lot of time talking and counseling their clients with it. And we work with a lot of divorce attorneys and work with their clients on both the front end, before they file or when the divorce is just starting, and then again after, once everything's said and done. Under the law, if you're married, you're married, and it doesn't matter how far along you are in your divorce. It doesn't matter if the judge has got the final order on his desk and just hasn't signed it yet. And so if you die without estate planning in place, without a will or without anything like that, if you're still legally married, then you don't have a will. The laws from your state are going to kick in, like we talked about. And generally, a good portion of your estate is presumed to go directed to your spouse. So now it doesn't take into consideration that this is a soon-to-be ex-spouse and that this is not somebody we necessarily want to get anything. You can take it a step further when you think about things like life insurance. If you have a life insurance policy and you're going through a divorce, you've got a lot of things on your mind, but thinking about who your beneficiaries are is probably not something that's very high on your list of priorities going through a divorce, because it's such an emotionally charged situation. But if you die, and even after you're divorced, if you die and hadn't changed the beneficiary on your life insurance policy from your soon-to-be former spouse or former spouse, then when you die, they will get that money. So those mistakes can be extraordinarily costly. And then there's situations where there's minor children involved. Divorce is money is one of the leading causes of divorce. So if you have a spouse that basically that ruins the marriage because of their spendthrift, problems or whatever the case may be, the last thing you want to happen is when you die, that all the stuff that you have and all the money is given to them to be the custodian for your minor children, because they could just burn through it and spend it frivolously as well. So there's a lot of other considerations there during, leading up to and during the divorce. And of course, once everything's said and done and the property has been separated and settled and everything, we know where everything goes, then there's another level of planning that needs to take place to make sure that planning's in place, because you don't have that spouse. If something happens to me today, I know that my wife, unless she's with me, will still be around to take care of my children and to do those sort of things. But if I'm divorced and I'm a single guy living out here in the world and something happens to me, now I got to think a little bit harder. Like, who do I want to give all this money to, and who would I want to trust to entrust all this property and money for the benefit of my kids, to do the right things for my children, to make sure they get it.
Now, another thing I'm seeing looking at your website, Brian, that's piqued my interest: Medicaid crisis planning. Talk about that.
Yeah, so back to the aging population. Medicaid crisis planning, the cost of long-term care is just skyrocketing. Medical advances in technology are wonderful, and we're living as people so much longer, but diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia that we've already talked about are crippling us physically, to where we may actually be alive, but we need so much help because we can't do things for ourselves any longer. So people end up basically bankrupt in nursing homes because they don't have the money to pay for it. Long-term care insurance is a great tool if you can get it, and I encourage people to explore it and to get it if they can. But the policies benefits have gotten reduced over the years by the insurance companies. The amount they'll pay has been reduced. The term that they'll pay, the number of years that they would pay out, have been reduced. So it's getting harder and harder for people to afford the kind of care that they need when people with their aging population and people go into nursing homes. So Medicaid is where most people turn when they run out of money. Then they don't have any other money left to pay. So Medicaid crisis planning, there's different. You can do pre-planning, you can do crisis planning. Those are the two options. Then the pre-planning is we're looking at someone's, situation. We have elderly people. Maybe there was just a recent diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, so where they're still competent, but they know that, things could regress and they could be in a situation where they need to be institutionalized. We sit down and we work with them and try to figure out the best way to get them into an assisted living or a long-term care facility and figure out how it's going to be paid for without bankrupting them or their children or leaving their other spouse, because maybe only one spouse goes in, one spouse may be healthy, leaving that spouse destitute and leaving them with nothing left because the nursing home took all the money and they had to sell the house and cash in the 401ks and blah, 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 blah. So that's the pre-planning side of things when we got a little bit of time on our hand. But the crisis planning that you reference is when I get the call from Steve and Steve says, Brian, my dad needs to be admitted like right now. We can't take care of him. We need professional care. We're not skilled nurses and we can't afford to have in-home care because that's outrageously expensive. And we need to get in. And by the way, we don't have, $5, $7, $10, $15,000 a month laying around that we can afford to private pay this. What do we do? And that's the crisis planning. So that's when we work with the families and figure out the assets and transition thing and institute estate plans in order to, number one, preserve the assets that we can for the other spouse that's not in a nursing home, that still needs to live and still needs to pay their bills and be able to keep a roof over their head and eat and so on and so forth, and still get the best care that we can for the spouse that is in that crisis mode that needs to be institutionalized. And generally that's done through Medicaid. Sometimes there's veterans benefits as well if the person qualifies, if they were in the service. I mean, anyone that spent any time in the military, I would strongly encourage to have them explore the availability of veterans benefits for them from the VA. There's some special things that they can qualify for and get that no one else can. And the good news about that is, there's a lot of bad news about veterans, the care and all the things, and there's a lot of things in the news lately. But the good news about this is the veterans benefits that they do qualify for are pretty broad as far as who's able to get them. And number one, and number two, they're in addition to the Medicaid. So it's not like you have to choose one or the other. You could actually get Medicaid help and help from the VA. So definitely something anyone that served in the military should look into. And in certain circumstances, sometimes spouses of former military may have eligibility there as well.
We've covered a lot of stuff, but what's the most common question you get?
Wow, the most common question I get, and I wouldn't say, well, taxes is always a big thing. People think about, death and taxes, as the old saying goes. So
yeah.
People are always worried about taxes. People are always worried about the state taking everything from them. So questions that surround that. But I'm trying to think. Probably the most common question, honestly, the most common question I probably get is, well, can I just download this on the internet and do it myself?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, just to be honest with you, it probably is. I have that conversation a lot. Or I don't have much, so I don't need anything fancy. Can I just download the forms? What do I Google? And it always makes me chuckle, as it did you. And so the answer to that is of course you can. Go ahead. You don't pay me or any other attorney for typing up the document. I mean, obviously, that's part of what I charge a fee for is my time in preparing the documents. But that's not really what I get paid for. You pay me for what I know. And
right.
If you know what I know, then you can certainly do it yourself. But if you don't know what I know, then how do you know if you're doing it right? And how do you know that it is included and everything is done the right way? And the problem with this, especially with estate planning, which makes it so touchy of a subject, is you don't realize there's a problem generally until it's too late.
Right.
Meaning, I've had these conversations, and I don't enjoy having these conversations, but we'll call it the DIY. Someone downloads the DIY will or power of attorney or whatever, and then mom or dad ends up in a nursing home or with dementia, or they die, and they bring this to me. The family brings this to me and says, I don't know what to do. I can't make heads or tails of this, but here's everything that we have. So help us out. And I look at it and I say, oh, yeah, but you forgot this. And they're like, well, how can that one word mean anything? And it said, well, it's a conversation for another day, but that one word means an awful lot in this situation. And the one word is the difference between this document being valid and effective and you having to pay me to go down to court now and deal with this another way, which costs a tremendous amount of money. So I don't discourage anyone from doing it because again, it's not, it's something that if you know what you're doing, anybody could do it. But that's kind of true with anything, right? If I knew how to fly a 747, I could be an airline pilot, but
right,
I don't.
Right.
So I'm going to trust that to professionals. But the internet is a wonderful thing, but it's always, be careful what you ask for because you might get it. And so I think with things like this that are so important, and they're, again, generally when the mistakes happen, they're irreversible, meaning you can't go back and undo what mom signed now that she's got Alzheimer's because she can't sign it again. So it's not what you know. You might know 80% of everything I know. You might know 90% of what I know. But that 10%, you don't know what you don't know. But so you're kind of guessing and you're relying and you're hoping. You're crossing your fingers and saying, boy, I hope this one I found on Google for free is the right one. And I hope it's legally sufficient. I hope the laws don't change or there's nothing that's wrong with it. But that's not really a plan. Hope isn't a plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Hope is crossing your fingers and rolling the dice, whatever you want to call it, and hoping for the best. But yeah, that's probably one of the most common ones. Is nobody thinks they have anything when they I don't know if people are embarrassed or if people are just modest or people don't think it, but it's like, oh, I don't have anything. I mean, I've had clients that have $10 million in cash assets. I don't have anything. I'm like, I'm just a normal guy, and I look at that, I'm thinking, okay, well, a normal guy with $10 million in the bank maybe, but you've got more money than a lot of people, but people generally don't think that way, and and it's not a bad thing. It's just people maybe downplay themselves and what they have, but you need to be honest with yourself about what you have with the level of planning, because when you have $10 million in the bank, you have all sorts of issues that people that have $1 million in assets don't have, like estate tax and things like that. So you're not doing yourself any favor. Modesty is a wonderful thing, but you could harm yourself in the long run by not truly having that honest conversation with yourself, saying, yeah, I've got some assets here, probably need to do something a little bit more than try to Google a free form or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well stated. Our guest today on Ask the Expert, Brian Douglas with Brian M. Douglas and Associates in Atlanta. Brian, how can we reach you?
As you said earlier, you can find us online at www.atlantagaestateplanning.com. And you can always call our office. We're here all the time, almost 7 days a week for me, 770-933-9009. But a little caveat there, I probably won't answer the phone on Sunday if I'm here. So.
Yeah, good point.
So if anyone that wants to test it, I probably will see the call, but I may not answer. But yeah, certainly through the website, and you can email. There's click to chat buttons on there, so you can chat with a live person. And that is available 24/7. So if you're, middle of the night, you can't sleep and you want to research, estate planning law, and you want to talk to somebody in my firm, someone will respond and enter a dialogue with you, and you'll have a live person there.
And a lot of good content on your website as well. Brian, thanks for being on the program today.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Thanks for listening to Ask the Expert with Steve Sleeper. Join us next time as entrepreneurs and professionals share their intriguing stories of success and service.